When you're working on API projects, you often have to ramp up on a complex domain, data model, and API conventions before you can even get started. I'm going to show you how GitHub Copilot and GitHub Copilot Chat allow me to jump into a complicated existing code base and be productive immediately. Let's take a look. So here I'm in the .NET Podcast application. This is a podcast management application, and I'm in the episode endpoints. And there's one endpoint here which gets all episodes by ID. And I want to write a new endpoint that gets all episodes for a show. So what I'm going to do is give it some context. I'm going to say method to get all episodes for a show. So now what I've done is I've provided context. It knows it's in the endpoint, all the endpoints for episodes. It understands the episode DTOs, etc. So when I hit enter, boom, right away, it gives me a really useful suggestion. So notice that this also matches the style, query style, and everything else that I'm using in the above endpoint. So I hit tab to accept it. Now, an important thing here is that GitHub Copilot is a pair programmer. It's not perfect. I'm not perfect. We're working together here. And you'll see here there is a syntax error. It was expecting that there would be a show ID parameter. In fact, it's .show.id. So I'll make that quick fix and we're all set. Now, since I've already gotten off to a pretty quick start, I want to improve this endpoint a bit. I expect it to be called pretty often, and so I want it to be fast and resilient. So I'm going to do a few things here, and I'm going to use GitHub Copilot Chat for that. So first off, I want to use in-memory caching. So add in-memory caching. All right. So it's going to look at the code that I've got, and it's going to figure out how to implement that in-memory cache. Now, what's really important to me here is I could go off and read the docs, but then I have to figure out how to actually write that code in a way that fits into my app. And it's gone and done that. What I really like about this too is it knows that it doesn't have to new up a cache or create its own separate cache. It knows that I'm running in an endpoint. And so because of that, it knows that I can use iMemory cache. So that's pretty cool. Let's go ahead and copy this code block, and we'll just go ahead and paste that in. All right. So it does know I can use a cache, but it hasn't injected it for me. And I actually want to take advantage of using ASP.NET Core's DI system to do that. So use DI to inject the cache. And so now it's going to actually inject that cache for me, which is going to be a little bit nicer. So here you'll see it's actually got this iMemory cache this time. Now, it doesn't always do this, but in this case, it's able to just completely insert this code and it'll replace my existing code. So I'll do that. And here I can see the changes right there. Okay, great. So this is all good. It's going to need me to add a using, which is fine. So we're all set up. What I like too here is it set an absolute expiration. I'm not going to do this, but what would a sliding expiration look like? There's a lot of different ways of implementing caching. And so here you can see it can suggest something like a sliding expiration policy as well. Also great is that it is giving me some explanation of what the code actually does, which is super nice. Now, I want to optimize this a little bit more. This is an API that's hitting a database, and it's always possible with that something could go wrong. Database call could time out, or there could be like a deadlock or some sort of thing. So I want to use retry. So add retry using poly. Now, Poly is an open source library. It's available as a NuGet package. When I'm using open source libraries, I often have to merge several things together. I've got to go look at the library's documentation. I also have to look at the documentation for, say, minimal APIs, and then I've got to merge that together with my code base. What's really great here is it's doing that for me, right? So it shows me here's how to merge that into your application. You'll notice here is the code that it's recommending to add that in. Now here, I need to add in this Poly package, so we'll go ahead and do that. And this looks pretty great. I do want to look a little bit more at the policy there, because this is just doing a retry async 3. What does that mean? What does this mean? Does this do? I want to understand this policy a bit more. So, okay. So it just retries. Okay, great. This is fine, but I would rather do something a little more sophisticated. So implement exponential backoff. So what I want to do, and I'll kind of make a decision of whether I like it or not. This actually does seem pretty good. So this is a retry policy, and it is using an exponential backoff. What's cool too, again, is that it's kind of giving me that explanation. And I could ask it more like, what does this even mean? And have it explain in more detail. But this looks like exactly what I wanted. So I want to change that retry policy and then make that call. So I'm going to just go ahead and replace this bit right there. And I think we're good. I would actually like a little more specifics. What can you give example timing for the exponential backoff in seconds? Just so I can visualize it a bit more. Okay, this is great. So 2, 4, 8. Okay. So I think I'm pretty happy with this. Now, a lot of the time when I work with code like this, I've added 2 different things here, and they could conflict. I've added a retry policy and I've added a cache. Are they going to conflict with each other? Will the cache and the retry conflict? Okay, great. So here it's giving me a second check. It says, all right, the cache and the retry shouldn't conflict. So I have a good feeling about that. This all is looking pretty nice. I have one other thing that I'm curious about. Is just kind of general optimization. So let's say, how should I optimize this method? And I'm curious what it's going to see. Okay. Wow, this looks pretty useful. So first of all, there's that first or default async instead of throwing an exception. But the big thing that I'm seeing there is that as no tracking. And that as no tracking completely makes sense to me because we're not updating the database here. We're just querying it. And so that looks pretty cool. I actually, I'm pick and choose some suggestions. I'm going to say I just like this as no tracking. So I'll do this episodes.as no tracking. As no tracking. Cool. All right. And we'll just format that a bit better. Cool. All right. This is looking nice. What could go wrong with this? Just see if there are any obvious kind of issues. So, okay, it's actually pretty happy with this. All right. I now I've written a good amount of code, pretty happy with it. This is about the time where I would want to, go ahead and commit it and maybe write some tests and kind of move forward with it. One last thing I like to do when I write a chunk of code is kind of have it read it back to me. So explain this method. And just want to kind of have it summarize what this method is doing. So yeah, this totally makes sense. So this is getting episode by show ID. It's using that podcast DB context and an iMemory cache. So, and then it kind of just walks me through it. So first is checking if it's already in cache. If not, it's going to query, and then it queries using a retry policy, and then it stores that data in the cache. And then this is giving me some additional things that I could continue to implement. So uh, we've seen quite a bit here. We've been very productive very quickly. We've written some useful code, and we've merged together some different concepts. We've merged together existing code base, existing data structure, caching, retry, and a beginning of data optimization. So I hope you've seen here how GitHub Copilot and GitHub Copilot Chat can help you ramp up and be productive really quickly. Happy coding.